Wow, markets have been pretty crazy lately, right? Especially for anyone keeping tabs on those big tech names like NVIDIA.
Yeah.
I mean, that 5-6% drop, that really got everyone talking, especially with all this tariff tantrum stuff, sending shockwaves through the whole market.
Yeah.
So I guess the big question for us today is this a chance to buy low on the leader in AI chips, or are there some real problems brewing?
Yeah, I mean, that's really what we want to get into today, right? It's not just about what the stock did today or yesterday, but like what are those bigger forces at play? So for this deep dive, we've really gone through a whole bunch of sources, CNBC market analysis, the Economic Times, what they're saying about these tariffs. Oh, and don't forget the Street, Bloomberg,
Yeah.
and just a ton of other market commentary.
Right.
We're trying to give you the clearest picture possible, all the different angles on what's happening with NVIDIA right now.
Yeah, and it seems like you hear both sides of the story, right?
Yeah.
Some people are saying this dip, it's just an overreaction, temporary blip, right? NVIDIA is still the king of AI. Nothing can touch them.
Right.
But then you've got, a valid counter argument. People who are really worried about the valuation being too high, maybe the hype around AI cooling off,
Mm,
even some serious geopolitical risks.
right.
That could really throw things off course. So we're going to dive into both sides, give you the full picture, and let's start with the case for NVIDIA's strength.
Right. Okay.
Why should we be looking at this dip as a possible buying opportunity?
Well, I think at the core of why NVIDIA is so valuable is that there's this incredibly strong, steady demand for their AI chips.
Yeah,
I mean, even Kevin Hanks in that investing tutorial video, he said there's no cracks in the demand story for NVIDIA and chips in general,
right.
which is, a pretty big statement. But
Yeah,
you see the proof everywhere you look, right? Companies like OpenAI, they're still buying tons of chips for their ChatGPT service.
right.
So this isn't just like some future prediction. It's real world use driving this huge demand for the processing power NVIDIA provides, and that's really hard to ignore.
Totally. If the core technology is being used that much by those kinds of companies, the infrastructure has to keep up, and NVIDIA is right there at the center of it all.
Mhm.
And it's not just about meeting today's demand, right? The stock price is also reflecting what investors believe NVIDIA will do next.
Exactly. The market is always looking ahead, and NVIDIA has like a track record of innovation. People are already excited about upcoming products like the Rubin chips, which were mentioned in that investing tutorial video.
Yeah.
And then you've got these really interesting ideas. I know it's kind of speculative, but Hanks mentioned, what if NVIDIA expanded beyond just serving the big cloud companies?
Right.
What if they brought their tech directly to the public, kind of like what Palantir did? I mean, that's a huge untapped market if they can pull it off.
Yeah. Yeah. This is where things get really interesting to me, right? Because with all this tension between the U.S. and China, all the talk about trade restrictions, the demand from China seems almost strange, right?
It's actually a really important point because it shows how important NVIDIA is around the world.
Yeah.
Even with the export limits the U.S. has put in place, the Times UK and the investing tutorial, they're reporting huge orders for NVIDIA's H20 chips, like over $16 billion worth, coming from Chinese companies.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, ByteDance, Alibaba, Tencent, these are the biggest names in Chinese tech, and they're still trying to get their hands on these chips, even under the restrictions.
Right.
And those H20 chips are the most advanced ones NVIDIA can legally sell to China right now. So it tells you something, right? They need this technology that badly, even if it means jumping through hoops and dealing with all these regulations. That's not just strong demand. It's almost like they depend on it.
It's almost like they're finding ways to work around the restrictions or even come to some kind of understanding because the demand is so crucial. So what about the financial side of things? Are analysts still saying NVIDIA is a good investment, especially after this dip?
Well, from what we saw in the investing tutorial, it seems like some analysts believe that the drop in NVIDIA's stock price is more about the general market climate, just a lot of nervousness in the market overall,
Right.
not so much about problems with NVIDIA itself.
Okay.
And they were talking about a projected price to earnings ratio of around 25, which for a company that's leading the charge in AI, you could argue that's actually a pretty good deal, especially after the stock went down.
Sure.
If you're someone who believes AI is going to keep growing long term, this could be a chance to get in at a lower price.
And it's interesting, when those initial tariffs were announced, the semiconductor industry was actually excluded. What's really behind NVIDIA's sudden stock plummet analysis, they pointed that out. But NVIDIA's stock still dropped anyway. Does that mean the market was just reacting out of fear more than anything?
Yeah, I think it shows you just how sensitive the market can be to any news that hints at instability, whether it's geopolitical or economic, especially when you're talking about a high growth, high profile stock like NVIDIA. So yeah, that initial reaction, even though semiconductors weren't directly targeted, it does kind of support the idea that this recent concerns about NVIDIA's actual business.
Okay, so that's a pretty strong case for why NVIDIA is still in a good position and why this dip might actually be a buying opportunity. But now we got to look at the other side, right? What are the real reasons why investors might want to be cautious? What are the warning signs that suggest this might be more than just a temporary blip?
Well, the biggest concern analysts keep bringing up is NVIDIA's valuation. I mean, the stock price went up so much throughout 2024. What's really behind NVIDIA's sudden stock plummet, analysis talks about this too, that a lot of people are now wondering if it grew too fast. Did it get ahead of its actual earnings potential?
Yeah.
And when you have that kind of explosive growth, you have to start thinking about market corrections. Is this valuation sustainable in the long run?
Right. And with AI being such a hot topic right now, is there a chance that investors might get tired of it? That the initial excitement might fade and people will start looking at actual results more closely?
That's a very real possibility. And what's really behind NVIDIA's sudden stock plummet, they actually touch on this idea of what they call AI fatigue. At first, everyone was super excited about AI, throwing money at anything related to it.
Right.
But now investors are starting to focus more on companies that can actually show a path to making money, to sustainable growth. They're not just betting on the potential anymore. They want to see real results. And that shift in thinking, it could mean less speculative investment in the AI sector overall, which could even hurt a leader like NVIDIA if their future growth doesn't meet the high expectations that are built into their current valuation.
And if you look at how other tech cycles have played out, we've seen this happen before, right? Especially with hardware, you have all this innovation, but eventually more competition comes in, prices go down, and even the most cutting-edge products become commodities.
Exactly. That's what KG was talking about in the investing tutorial video. Historically, you see these cycles where hardware gets commoditized. More companies enter the market, you have alternative technologies popping up, and suddenly there's pressure to lower prices. And that eats into profit margins. The worry is that even NVIDIA, with its current lead in technology, they might eventually face the same pressure as the AI chip market matures and new players try to grab market share.
The investing tutorial also brought up something interesting about NVIDIA's own rapid product development. They're putting out these new, super powerful GPUs at an incredibly fast pace. Could that actually create some problems for them?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like a double-edged sword, right? Usually, rapid innovation is a good thing. But when you're releasing new GPUs so quickly, like KG mentioned, you run the risk of cannibalizing your own sales. Think about it like new phone releases, right? If a much better model comes out too soon after the last one, some people might just wait instead of buying the older model, even if it's still a great phone.
Right.
NVIDIA is facing a similar challenge with their top-of-the-line chips like the H100 and H200. If they keep releasing even more powerful versions so rapidly, potential buyers might hold off on buying anything, which could actually hurt sales of their current best products.
And of course, we can't talk about all this market turmoil without addressing the big news, those new U.S. tariffs. They seem to have cast a shadow over the entire tech world.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Those tariffs have added a huge layer of uncertainty, and they could really increase costs across the whole semiconductor industry. The Economic Times and Bloomberg, they've laid out the details, right? We're talking about a 32% tariff on stuff coming from Taiwan and a combined 54% tariff on goods from China on top of the 20% that was already in place.
Wow.
Yeah, and the thing is, Taiwan and China, they're like the main hubs for manufacturing semiconductors and making AI servers. So these tariffs could directly drive up the price of AI servers and GPUs, which could then lower the demand for NVIDIA's products because all those components are going to get more expensive.
And it's not just about the direct cost increase, right? There are also worries about disruptions to those incredibly complex global supply chains that the tech industry relies on.
Absolutely. The Economic Times, they specifically mentioned fears about these supply chain disruptions because of the tariffs. And we saw the market react immediately, right? Companies like Apple, they do a lot of their manufacturing in Asia, China, India, Vietnam. And those countries are all facing pretty hefty tariffs, according to Bloomberg, 34%, 26%, and 46% respectively. And Apple's stock took a hit right away. So that tells you how worried the market is that these tariffs are going to mess things up, create bottlenecks and delays in the global tech supply chain, which would obviously impact NVIDIA and all their customers indirectly, but still significantly.
And it seems like a lot of experts are skeptical that these tariffs will actually achieve their goal, bringing semiconductor manufacturing back to the United States in a big way.
Yeah, that's a key point that came up in the Economic Times report. While there was some talk about TSMC investing in Arizona, most of the industry analysts they surveyed said that, at least for now, semiconductor companies and distributors don't plan on making any drastic moves to shift their operations to the U.S. just because of these tariffs.
Right.
The general feeling is that these tariffs might not be a permanent thing, so making those big, expensive changes would be a huge risk.
And we can't forget about the overall market context, right? It seems like the tariffs were the trigger for a broader market downturn.
Definitely. The Street article, they called it a $2 trillion tariff tantrum plunge. When the market gets that risk averse, even really strong companies like NVIDIA can get dragged down. Investors just start selling everything. It's a case where the general mood of the market can overshadow positive things happening within a specific company, at least for a while.
And before we wrap up, it's worth remembering that there were already some signs of trouble even before the big tariff announcement, like the what's really behind NVIDIA's sudden stock plummet analysis mentioned. Some analysts were downgrading NVIDIA, expressing some doubts.
Right.
So there were already concerns about the valuation, about future growth, even before all this geopolitical stuff started happening.
Exactly. Those analyst downgrades were probably reflecting those valuation concerns we talked about earlier and maybe some early signs that the excitement around AI investments was starting to cool off. So those negative feelings that were already there, they probably made the stock more vulnerable to a big drop when the market started to panic like it did with the tariffs.
So it's pretty clear that this is a really complex situation with strong arguments on both sides. You've got the undeniable demand, the potential for future growth, but also major concerns about valuation, market sentiment, and those geopolitical risks we talked about. So how do we even start to make sense of all this?
I think the first thing to remember is that both the optimistic and the cautious viewpoints are valid. It's not a black and white situation, right?
Right.
You've got this huge demand for NVIDIA's technology, especially with AI growing so fast. And that's a major force pushing things forward. But at the same time, there are all these external pressures pushing back, coming from the general uncertainty in the economy and these new geopolitical policies, especially those tariffs, which could have a ripple effect throughout the entire industry.
And this is a good reminder for our listeners, right? That the market's initial reaction, what happens in the short term, doesn't always tell the whole story.
Yeah.
A company's long-term strength, its real value, that's a different story.
Absolutely. The market can be really unpredictable and emotional, and it reacts to all sorts of things that are outside any single company's control. So even when you see a big drop in a major stock like NVIDIA, it's important to look beyond the immediate price changes. You got to consider the bigger picture. What are NVIDIA's strengths? What are their prospects for the future? But also, what are those external economic and political challenges that are affecting them and the whole tech sector?
So for our listeners, what's the key takeaway from all this? What should they keep in mind as they try to figure out what's going on with NVIDIA?
I think the most important thing to understand is that there are a lot of factors at play here, and they're all interconnected. You've got NVIDIA's strong position in the market, how investors are feeling about the company, and the changing global landscape, both economically and politically. And all those things are going to influence how NVIDIA performs in the future. So this recent dip in NVIDIA's stock price, it's not a guaranteed buying opportunity, but it's not a sure sign of doom either.
Right.
It's a situation where there are potential rewards if you believe in the long-term growth of AI, but there are also very real risks tied to how the company is valued,
Yeah.
the possibility that the AI hype might fade, and those geopolitical headwinds that could hit the entire sector.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something for everyone to think about, right? Will the demand for AI, which seems unstoppable right now, will it be strong enough to overcome the rising costs and all this geopolitical uncertainty we've talked about? Or will those external pressures eventually put a limit on NVIDIA's growth? It's a really important question to keep in mind as you watch what happens in the AI and semiconductor industries.
Yeah, and this is just the start of the conversation, right? We encourage everyone to keep doing their own research, keep analyzing as more information comes out, and as we start to see the real effects of these policies down the road. Think critically about which factors are going to be the most important in the long run. Is it the underlying demand, the concerns about valuation, or the geopolitical landscape? Which one do you think will ultimately determine how NVIDIA performs in the future?
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll be back soon with another look at what's really going on behind the headlines.
See you, bet.